Hello everyone, I'm Annie Gibbins and you're listening to Memoirs of Successful Women, the podcast where you get to hear candid conversations with fascinating women from around the globe who share aspects of their business and life journey, how they measure their success and what they have learned along the way. Hello and welcome to Memoirs of Successful Women. Today I have an absolute delight for you. I'm introducing you to Shelli Brunswick, the COO of Space Foundation. She brings a broad perspective and deep vision of the global space ecosystem. From a distinguished career as a space acquisition and program management leader and congressional liaison for the US Air Force, to her current role overseeing Space Foundation's three primary divisions, the Center for Innovation and Education, Symposium 365, and Global Alliance. She's advocating for space technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, diversity, and inclusion, such important topics. And Shelli has been able to collaborate with organizations all around the world to connect commercial, government, and educational sectors. She's also been named the 2020 Diversity and Inclusion Officer and Role Model of the Year by WomenTech Network. So welcome to the program, Shelli.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to make sure to send you an extra holiday gift for that amazing intro. I'm going to take you everywhere I go.
Oh, well, I can't wait to come to America now that we've all been released post-COVID. So I might take you up on that one day.
Wonderful.
No, that's what I love about this show, this podcast, just meeting amazing people from around the world. I never cease to be inspired, impressed, dazzled by just the breadth of woman, you know, the areas that we can dabble in. And I've certainly never had anyone on my show with the background like you've had. So let's just launch into your role at the moment. I know you've got an active leadership role with United Nations Space for Women. You're also in WomenTech Networks and other areas, but let's just start there. What do you actually do for those people who actually aren't aware? What would Space for Women even mean?
So the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs has a program called Space for Women, and it's all part of the Sustainable Development Goals for gender equality and equal education. So what we look at for UNUSA, that's how I'm going to abbreviate UNUSA, is how do we bring more women and girls into the space ecosystem? So I am a mentor for the program. So they have two programs. One is the formal mentoring, and then they have a more informal network. And for your listeners who are like, I might want to check this out, first of all, it is open to men and women. So you could go on Facebook, UNUSA Space for Women, and you can participate via Facebook. There's a Slack channel as well, and you can talk about if you're doing activities in your country or you just want to start connecting with other women and men around the world who are looking at creating more opportunity. And then the program I primarily focus on is the formal mentoring. So at my role at Space Foundation, we do have that Center for Innovation and Education. And we are passionate about believing that when you find mentors, you can overcome many other roadblocks that might prevent you to come into the space ecosystem.
Yeah.
So I practice what I preach. I say you should find a mentor. I say you should be a mentor. I've had wonderful mentors in my career. So this is part of my opportunity to give back. And so far I have only had women, but it's open to men and women. The women I have met through this program, both the other mentors around the world, as well as the proteges, it's fantastic. I've learned so much. I every time I get a new protege, I'm like, oh, I learned so much from them. Some of them are in other industries. Some of them are entrepreneurs. Some of them are in different technologies. They're outside the space ecosystem. Although technically we'll talk about that more. Nobody is really outside the space ecosystem. And so it's just a great learning opportunity for me. And I love connecting I've had a couple proteges in the US, but the majority have been international: Pakistan, India, Portugal, Italy, Africa, I'm thinking Norway, so Canada, Oklahoma here in the US. So I've had some amazing women I've met through this program, and I learn as much as I give. So that's a little bit about the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs. And WomenTech Network is a wonderful organization as well. I'm on their advisory board, and they have both informal programs, but they also do have a formal mentoring program. And again, don't be shied away if it says WomenTech Network. It's open to men and women. And I have met, and they've all been women so far, amazing women through this program. So I just share with your audience, if you're looking to be a mentor, and you can be a mentor at any stage in your career, college students can mentor high school students, but be a mentor, you get so much out of it. And for those of you who want to understand how to navigate life a little easier, I mean, that's your profession, a life coach, find a mentor.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely find a mentor. I think it's an essential ingredient for everybody in every vocation of life, at every different stage of life, right? Every stage of transition, doesn't matter where you're at, try and find someone who's just done that journey before you, and you won't do it exactly in their way. You'll pick up their tips and tricks, and then other things won't resonate, and you'll say, thanks for that. It's the opportunity to just dive in and learn from them and then apply it to your context. I'm currently a mentor with a STEM program here in Australia. And so I just find it's so much value. When people are worried about reaching out and asking a mentor, I tell you what, the mentors just benefit so much as well, because you just get to enjoy, these new innovative projects, the way young people are thinking, and, the ideas that they've got, and the journey and the decisions they're going to make. It's an absolute delight to be a mentor. So definitely mentors and mentees definitely seize this opportunity. Let's just take the listeners back then and find out, how does a woman from the US, how do you actually get into the area of space? What has been your career journey, and was it something that you always hoped? Were you one of those little girls who thought, I'd love to just, almost become an astronaut or learn about the beyond?
Well, when we really think about it, let's go back 40 years and think, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, when you think about the space program, it really was just a couple countries, primarily male, primarily government. So you were in the military or a civil space agency.
Yeah.
So, and you were a STEM professional. So you can think about that. So when I graduated high school, I enlisted in the US Air Force. That wasn't even a possibility of what I was thinking. So I'll kind of go through my life journey with you a little later. But so I enlisted in the Air Force. I went to school at night, and I earned my bachelor's degree going to school at night. And then I applied to be an officer in the US Air Force. And that's when my journey in space began, because the Air Force assigned me to be a space project manager. And so I did 12 years as HR, human relations for the Air Force. And then I became an officer. And then, wow, what is this new thing? And it's been an amazing journey ever since. And I've loved it. I've learned all about, initially, that was more than almost 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Not to tell you how old I am, but again, I was in the Air Force, so somewhat a traditional route. You were looking at traditional activities. The government did it all: ground station, launch vehicles, satellites. That was kind of the space industry. Now you're looking at the space industry. It's commercial. It's all sectors of the economy. It's primarily being driven by entrepreneurs, commercializing technologies. Now you don't have to be a STEM professional. We still need STEM professionals: science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But we also need media and fashion designers and project managers and entrepreneurs and technicians. So individuals with high school graduates that become an intern or get a certificate, all the way to PhD. So now it is truly democratized, and there's opportunities for all. So technically, you're now a space journalist, a space mentor coach, because you've talked to me. So now you're part of the space ecosystem. I'm going to adopt you.
I feel like I've had a massive promotion just in a few sort of minutes. And I think that's incredible, because I must admit, I've been one of those people think someone who works, in the Space Foundation has to be like PhD level, total science geek, trained to be an astronaut. You don't think that there is, a role for all of these different people. So I think people who are fascinated by this area, I think that's a really enlightening point already. I think it's also interesting. yes, because now I look at the commercial side. You think of, Richard Branson or Elon Musk or people, paying money to go up in space. And it's kind of like, wow, anyone can go up in space these days if you've got a few million or billion to be free. So that whole change of environment must be very stressful for government, actually, when they've had total control over this area. And now it is actually branching out into the commercial sector. What does that mean? And I'm sure a lot of people must get quite stressed about that, because we have to adapt and change, right? And if you don't, then you we won't be meeting the needs of our current society, right? So what have been the barriers for women, though? So you've actually, you've referenced that when you came in, back in the day, probably similar to my day, of, everything was not suitable for women, or probably not an opportunity for women, or even if you were had that opportunity, you weren't therefore in government or in the right sector. What have been the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome that you're now have pioneered for other people to sort of have an easier ride, if you like? They'll have their own challenges, but what have been your challenges?
So again, as I came into the space ecosystem, so when I applied to be an officer in the U.S. Air Force, my opportunity for being selected was only 12%, 1-2. And that's because I do not have a STEM degree. I have a business degree. I have an MBA. And so back in that time, that was not a normal pathway for space professionals. However, and I'll tell you about that. I wasn't selected the first time, but I was selected the second time. And so there's always a life lesson in that.
Yeah.
But I was selected the second time, and you're like, wow, what is this new thing? I was unfamiliar and a little bit, what is this thing? Loved it, embraced it. It was exciting. But the other thing is, as you said, there were not a lot of women at that time. I never noticed it. As a military, I'd been in the military a number of years. So at this point, I was very seasoned. And so when somebody one day pointed out, are you uncomfortable? You're like the only woman in the room.
Yeah.
You kind of go like this and you go, I never noticed it. I just thought we were all professionals. And so I think since I never noticed it, you treat people as they are individuals. What I came to the table with was the project manager for a program. And I had multiple talented individuals that were also at the table, and being able to listen and communicate and focus on the mission. So if you're in industry, how do you accomplish the task? How do you take care of the customer? In the military, how do you accomplish the mission? How do you take care of your team? So I always just focused on what are we trying to accomplish here, not on who's at the table, who's male or female, are you military or civilian or a contractor? It's easy for us to put labels on people, but we
Yeah.
really are all just people. And what we've learned, over the last 30 years is that it's really good to bring diversity to the table. It's really good to bring multi-generational regions of the world, male and female, to the table, because sometimes, and usually, and they've proven it, so it won't be sometimes, what they've proven through reports is that you come up with better solutions.
Yes.
You also, for businesses, it increases your bottom line. So I'll just share that with you. I don't know if I had a challenging journey. I mean, I just had a journey. And what I hope is that those who are coming behind me, it's a much easier journey where they don't sit and say, wow, did you know you're the only woman, or only
Yeah.
African American, or only Hispanic, or wow, you're the only person here from Africa, or you're the only person here from Australia. Australia has now a space agency. So I think we're coming to the table, and there's far more diversity, not just men and women, not just ethnicities, because that's a lot US ethnicities, but regions of the world, and generational. We can look at the US has an aging population. So how do we make sure that we're inviting the next generation to also sit at the table, who may have been raised in a very different mindset? I was not raised where you sat in front of a computer or you played a game, or I think I played Pong, and Pac-Man. So
Yeah.
it's very different. So the individuals graduating from high school and college have a very different skill set
Yeah.
than those of us my era, because we didn't have that constant entertainment factor, I'll call it, that constant engagement. And so they're coming to the table with faster skills, sometimes more computer savvy skills, technology skills, different ways of thinking about it. So as leaders, invite diversity to the table. So I will laugh though, because when you invite diversity to the table, sometimes you're not always thrilled with what diversity says. And I don't mean that negative. It's like, somebody says something and they come at it from a different angle, and, you just have to sit back. And I have to share that with other people. It's easy to come to a quick solution when everybody thinks the same. So when
Exactly.
you bring in somebody different, you have to be willing to say, I want to hear what you're saying. I'm going to listen because I want you at the table and I want you to feel comfortable and I want you to say what you have to say.
Mm.
So I also share that it can be challenging to hear something in a different tone than what you may be used to. And I'm guilty of that as well. So I always have to check myself and say, I need to make sure that I'm listening with those two ears, and
Mm.
I only have one mouth. So make sure I'm listening twice as much.
Absolutely, because we can all have unconscious bias, right? It's just our default is, we love the way we think. That's why we think that way, and I know that those same principles work in boards that, I work in, that we're wanting board diversity for that same reason, that sometimes it's more challenging. Yes, because you've got a lot of, you've got a lot more breadth of ideas, thinking, concepts, but it actually makes it so much richer. And so once you play that out and you start encouraging it and supporting it, which is why I think, diversity has to lead to inclusion. You can have a lot of diversity, but if those voices are not heard, if they're not included, then you're just doing, you're just getting numbers on the board, right? It's easy for you to say, oh, now we've got a 50-50 women's split, which would be amazing because it's usually like 5 to 20. But if you are doing that, it's about having that diversity and also inclusion. And I love the way you've, referenced also that it's not just, gender. It's all of that's right. It's all racial groups. It's the intergenerationalized thing's fantastic. Being a mum of 5, it never ceases to surprise me just how different even, Gen Ys to millennials to Gen Zs think, it really is so encouraging once you tap into their mindsets and how they apply and gain knowledge, gain and receive, and unpack what they're learning. It's really important, particularly when you're a mentor, to actually, see what you say and how they then interpret that. I think that is absolutely brilliant. I think also it's interesting, and it was probably because you did have your route by the Air Force that you probably didn't really notice the gender bias. But I think if you look back, was there a women's bathroom, for example, did you see pictures on the wall of women actually having these important roles, these executive roles? I think this is an area that we will really know that we have changed things for women globally, and also with other areas of diversity. Then when you are those little girls in school and you actually do see that speakers come in like a woman who's been successful in this place, that you'll see footage in movies and other areas that will demonstrate women at these executive sort of roles or really achieving, and that it's not actually an issue. So while you didn't notice it so much, I'm sure a lot of other people do. And I think we've still got a lot of work to be done, but it is so encouraging to hear from you today, to hear how we've actually come so far. And I think we often do need to stop and pause and appreciate that while we're always striving for total equality, right?
Exactly.
So those women wanting to actually get into space, what is the route that they should travel? What is their best route into this area? Or is it really that just follow your own path and then come and join? Like you said before, there's a role for everybody.
So there really is a role. And what I share with people is your path into space could be very different. So again, I have a business degree, but we also look at SpaceX and Blue Origin hired fashion designers, right? You're not seeing those orange spacesuits from NASA going up in the SpaceX or Blue Origin. I believe Under Armour is the Blue Origin, and SpaceX has a fashion designer for their nice white suits. So even for fashion designers, you can think about it. Wow, who would have thought 30 years ago? Healthcare. When we're thinking about all the diseases that could impact us here on Earth, they also happen in outer space. You know, cancer happens much faster because you're not protected by the Earth's atmosphere. You're not protected from that radiation. We're also not designed as human beings to live in microgravity environment. So it causes some challenges. Women develop osteoporosis much faster. Men have eye problems. You can have hearing problems. You have muscle loss. So as we look to solve those challenges for going on to the moon and Mars and beyond, we can solve them here on Earth. And there's already some great technology, you know, mammogram technology, cataract surgery, hearing, the cochlear implants. So much has come from space technology. So if you're passionate about healthcare, you could look at commercializing that healthcare technology or working on a team for NASA or a company that's trying to mitigate living in microgravity environment. Or if you're passionate about cybersecurity or artificial intelligence or robotics, you have an opportunity to be part of the space ecosystem. So what I'll share with you is there are 16 different sectors that are part of the space ecosystem.
Wow.
Only one of them says space. The others are agriculture, healthcare, education, finance, the Internet of Things, transportation, communications, and obviously I can name them all for you. So what I share with your audience, especially since it's global,
Yeah.
they may not have a space ecosystem like the US or China or Russia or Europe or the UAE Space Agency, but they may be very passionate about agriculture, which is a large part of ecosystems around the world. And there's space technology that can be applied for agriculture. What we've learned by
Mm.
using space technology called precision agriculture, we can increase crop yields by 10%. Well, for a farmer, one, that's more money in your pocket, less seeds. You can also use space technology to determine, do I need to water or not water?
Mm.
Does this sector have pests? Do I need to eradicate for pest control or not? So you can use that space technology to do things in a very different manner that's far more efficient, that can help you make more money, but also we need to create more food on planet Earth for the
Mm.
growing population. So the ways we've done food production for the last centuries is not sustainable. So we
Yeah.
have to really look at what are some different methods. So we can look at precision agriculture. We can also look at how are we going to grow food on Mars? How
Mm.
are we going to create protein supplements on Mars? We're not going to fly cows there. So you can see many of these companies like Beyond Meat and plant-based proteins. We're doing those on planet Earth, but we can also take that off world as well. And so by vice versa, or better management of our resources. So I'm going down the rabbit hole a little bit,
Oh,
but what
I'm
I'm
just
sharing with
loving
your
this.
audience is there's so many wonderful opportunities for someone to be passionate about agriculture. Or look at all our entire financial system
Mm.
runs on space and cyber technology. It's
Yeah.
running off those GPS satellites. Every time somebody in your audience goes and uses an ATM or swipes their credit card, it is getting a date timestamp from those GPS satellites, and that's how we're tracking things. But you can also look at cryptocurrency. You know, that is all running on space and cyber technology with blockchain. How are we going to pay people on Mars? I mean, do we do all our payments? You know, very rarely do we pull out, cash, real money. Most of the
Yeah.
times it's a credit card. How many of us really use checks anymore? I mean, what is a check, right? Some people are probably
Exactly.
like, I've never heard of that. Um, I remember balancing my checkbook the old fashioned way. I'm sure there's people in your audience group who are like, what is
What
that?
is a check?
So transportation, we look at these ship cargoes that are coming to the US that are backing up. They're coming using GPS technology. Airplanes are using GPS technology. So our transportation system of how things get around is using space technology. You're looking at autonomous vehicles. So it used to just be drones in the air, but you have underwater drones. Now you're looking at driverless vehicles, for the trucking industry. That's all going to run on space and cyber technology. And so, what I'm sharing with your audience is follow your passion. You
Mm.
could work for a government, you could work in academia, you could go work for a big company that's already in the space industry. You could go work at a startup. So your opportunities, no matter what your skill set, is exciting. So I just came back from Dubai Expo last month. I was there for Space Week,
Yeah.
and I had somebody come up to me and say, I have a finance degree. Can I be in the space industry? And I'm like, absolutely.
Yeah.
Space Foundation. I got a chief financial officer. NASA hires financial managers. So, yes, you can be in the space industry. So, I'm sharing with your audience the sky is no longer the limit.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well said. You have seriously blown my mind. It's like everybody can work in the space industry. And I think there's so many, particularly young people coming through who really, they're very innovative. They're wanting to do things for the planet. They're wanting to be more efficient, more effective, save money, save the environment. There's so many aspects that you've even just referred to that there would be a place for them there. And I love the fact that we often don't think about that. We don't think of the day-to-day technology that we use, particularly satellites and things, of being, obviously part of that whole realm. We just don't even consider how it all works and how much we actually rely on it and how important it is, because if you're looking at attacks to world order, it's certainly in the cyber sector, right? So I think we do need to be very concerned there. You've mentioned a couple of times living on Mars. Is this a reality for us, and how far away is this?
Well, I'm not sure it's a reality in the near term, and I'll say in the next 10, 15, 20 years. I do believe, we're already on Mars. We're already started that Mars process, and we've done it with robots, right? Everybody, we've sent those rovers there, Perseverance. The UAE sent a satellite, they've got Hope. So we already are doing it. And the first way we're colonizing it is with robots, and we're getting information in it, sending it back through satellite relays and communications and space and cyber technology. And we're going to learn from that. And then are we going to eventually, do we send things to help 3D print habitats? And there are experts who are thinking about, what does Mars architecture look like, right? What does that architecture look like on
Yeah.
Mars? And we're looking at, how are we going to grow food, and how are we going to get it there, and how are we going to do healthcare? So we are making strides. And you can see, everyone talks about Elon Musk. He has said he wants to die on Mars, just not on impact. So I think where we used to be 40, 50 years ago, a government driven desire to pursue outer space, I think the government is still there, but I see commercial as the driver now. I see commercial opportunities leading the pathway to get us back to the moon, forward to the moon. And there's lots of great things going on when we go back to the moon, and then onto Mars and beyond. And what do we learn? And the commercialization opportunities again, as you're thinking about, well, if I can build habitats on Mars for human beings, I could build those habitats here on planet Earth. You're in
Yeah.
Australia, you have desert environments. The US has desert environments, the Middle East. So those type of habitats could be very valuable here on planet Earth too, to look at regions where maybe we aren't habiting the planet because of harsh, austere living environments. So we can look at that. And again, how are we going to grow that food there then? We're not going to bring a bunch of cows out to the desert and cattle, but can we grow foods in hydroponics? How are we going to cultivate that? So we can look at different methods. How are we going to recycle our water? Everything on the International Space Station is recycled. So I'm not going to go into the details about where all the water comes from. I'm just going to say it's recycled. So how do we, as human beings, here on planet Earth, we haven't thought about that we have a limited supply of clean water, but we know many parts of the world do not have clean water. So how do we help create clean water for Mars? But we can also then, how do we do that on planet Earth? How do we do filtration systems? And what I'll share with your audience, for those of you who are out there going, I want to learn more, maybe I want to be an entrepreneur. NASA and the European Space Agency have thousands of space patents that are waiting to be commercialized. So some of those are water filtration, agriculture, energy storage solutions, healthcare. So for individuals in your audience who are entrepreneurial focused and maybe you don't have your own idea yet, you could go check out those websites, NASA Tech Transfer Office, European Space Agency Tech Transfer Office. look at the patents they have, and anyone can apply for those. Now, that doesn't
Mm,
mean they'll award it to you. It could be national security or other things, but you could certainly look at it and potentially apply for that patent and look to commercialize it. If you're a US citizen through NASA, you can actually apply for a grant to help you look at commercializing that technology. So for your audience who are like, I want to check out this entrepreneurial thing, let me learn more about this, there's great opportunities. And for those of you who are like, I'm not sure I want to be an entrepreneur, but I'm really interested in some of these areas, there are great companies out there, startup companies
yeah.
that are looking for your skill set. Think about SpaceX. We all think about them now, but think about 20 years ago. Employee, we know employee one was Elon Musk, but think about employee five or employee 10 or
Mm,
employee 15 who started way back then and see what they've built. You could be that employee five for an
mm.
amazing startup that not only helps us go on to the moon and Mars, but helps us right here on planet Earth.
Oh my goodness, it's breathtaking just listening to you. Seriously, Shelli, I think everyone's going to be mind-boggling thinking now. I think that's wonderful because so many people just go, yeah, I don't know my idea. You're saying there's so many ideas that have already been made. They're just there for the taking. Obviously you have to be equipped and qualified and be able to develop, how you would make that happen. But I think that is just so brilliant. One thing I'm already thinking of, yeah, just the effects. While you've got people sort of obviously working on the innovation and technologies for space, the value of these technologies. Here in Australia, we've got 25 million people, but we're all coastal because we have this massive slab of land that we just go, oh well, no one could live there. Well, how much will our country change when suddenly, yes, you have these new technologies for new, what you can grow, how you can have clean water, how you can just farm differently. I think that is just so brilliant that there's so many technologies that you would be utilizing within your own country, not just Australia, certainly a lot of Africa and the Middle East, areas that are, so dry and arid, which basically just need a new realm of thinking, which costs money, which is why that commercial aspect is so important, because it is going to be driving things for a different purpose, but will also therefore be able to commercialize the other opportunities to come back. Is there a risk with the significant investment by a few commercial partners or players? Is that a risk to the world when you've got, a few people sort of dominating space, if you like?
So I think we only think there's a few dominating people because we hear about them in the news all the time,
Yeah.
right? We hear about Elon Musk, we hear about Jeff Bezos, but space tourism is a very small piece of the space ecosystem. So let me share with you the global space economy in 2020, according to Space Foundation, our annual space report that publishes that number, and we just did in July, was $447 billion.
Mm.
And of that $447 billion, 80% is commercial. So it's products and services. That is not launch vehicles for space tourism. That is such a small amount right now.
Mm.
It's really satellites, it's telecommunications, it's how we're talking right now with Zoom. It's really different products and services. So that is a small part, and the bigger part that I want to share with your audience is it's $447 billion in 2020, but many analysts predict that by 2030, it's over a trillion. Some people say it could be a 1.5 trillion.
Mm.
By 2040, you're over 3 trillion. And again, it's in all that technology I shared. It's data analytics and healthcare, quantum computing, cyber, artificial intelligence, robotics. So it's really all technologies. And so there's going to be exponential growth. So that's why I share with your audience, where is your passion? Not all pathways require a PhD.
Mm.
Some will. Some pathways might be, we learned during COVID how important our supply chains are, how important manufacturing is, not just manufacturing offshore, as they call it, outside your country, but actually having some manufacturing in your country to provide stable supply chains, to provide stability in uncertain times. I mean, the pandemic definitely highlighted that although just in time supply chains was really great on paper when the world worked perfectly.
Yes.
What we've learned is that it's not a perfect solution when an unforeseen event takes place like a pandemic, and COVID will probably have some ramifications for many years to come. So what I share with you is we're learning, manufacturing. And again, in the US, you could get a certificate in manufacturing from a community college. You could do that while you're still in high school. You can walk into a great paying job.
Mm.
So that's high school graduate to PhD, all career fields. Really, we looked at how impacted the aerospace and space sector was due to COVID because their supply chains were stressed. How many suppliers were in trouble? Many suppliers, maybe small or medium-sized businesses. And so it's really important to understand the importance of the supply chain. And we've really, our country has, I know Australia has, really looked at how do we make sure we help suppliers stay in business? And the US did it through a thing called the PPP. It was a loan that was provided and then forgiven almost as a grant, but it allowed small and medium sized companies that were impacted by COVID to stay in business, to keep their payroll going until we could get through COVID. So I will share one more story about COVID because we learned about supply chains and how that impacts the space ecosystem. But we also, at Space Foundation, we highlight space technology that benefits life on Earth. And in 2020, we inducted 3 technologies that allowed 2020's pandemic to be different than the pandemic of 1918. And
Mhm.
that was telecommunications, telehealth, and teleconferencing. All of those came from space technology.
Mm.
Imagine what the 2020 pandemic would have been like if children could not have homeschooled, if we could have not worked from home. And again, I know we had frontline workers in stores, filling shelves, frontline, ambulance and healthcare workers, and there were individuals who had to be frontline. But many individuals were also able to work from home
Mhm.
because of that space technology. Children were allowed to work to do their homework from home. And we can debate, did we lose a year in education? That's another story. But that technology allowed the pandemic of 2020 to be very different than 1918.
Mm. Oh, 100%, 100%. We cannot even imagine the effects that it would be if we couldn't have homeschooled our kids. We couldn't have continued meeting. I actually found, although we thought, bringing businesses off site, which we thought was impossible, suddenly within, a few weeks, I certainly brought all of mine off site. And now we're actually now going, well, how many days will we go back into the office? We've got this whole new normal because we just now talk on Zoom or Teams or whatever and so there's a massive difference that we, although people like to think of the cost, and yes, it's not a perfect situation, and there's certainly been challenges, definitely socioeconomic challenges with kids accessing computers and technologies during that time, but still, considering it's certainly not as bad as it could have been by far, so we need to once again value these technologies, which constantly are improving. It's amazing. There's new updates happening all the time that we just say thank you for, but we know that there's an entire infrastructure behind there going, okay, well, this is the next level, this is the next level, and then we get to reap the benefits of that. So fantastic. So what's next for you, Shelli? As this podcast is called Memoirs of Successful Women. You're an incredibly successful woman. What does success mean for you, and what areas, this stage of your career, how do you see it progressing? Is it more on giving back? Is it more in that mentoring role? Is it more just things that you've always been fascinated about that you could then sort of probably just, do a bit of a pivot towards? What does the future look like for you?
Well, that's a great question. And I look at it that having served in the military for 30 years, I'm really about being a servant leader. How do I give back? And that's why I work at Space Foundation. Space Foundation is a US nonprofit. We do business internationally. You talked about our 3 divisions. We have Symposium 365, which is your trusted source for information. We have Global Alliance, which is partnerships. And then we have our Center for Innovation and Education. And that's all about lifelong learning for workforce development and economic opportunities. So just what we talked about. I'm passionate about our Center for Innovation and Education. As I said, I was just in Dubai. I spoke in Doha. Next month, I'll be speaking at a conference in Egypt. For me, the global space economy, as I just shared with you, there's lots of opportunity, but there's also some challenges,
Mm.
right? Technology is changing quickly. Jobs are going to change. New jobs are going to be created. Some jobs are going to go away. We also saw during COVID, uh, women kind of took some steps back. Many of them left the workforce. They had to take care of children at home and other things. And so we saw women took a step back during the pandemic in um, their place in the workforce. But I also look at it around the globe. When you think about that space ecosystem and what the US did by the Apollo program, many people said, why did we invest in that? Yes, it was a political race between the US and Russia.
Mm.
But when we now look at those thousands of patents at NASA and the technology we use every day, are you aware firefighters are wearing materials, that fire retardant clothing that came from the Apollo era? When we go to buy a crib for our children, it's because of fire retardant clothing that came from the space industry. It's formulated food that we created for the space industry. It's inflatable rafts that we created for the space industry. So what we're seeing is, and other countries are seeing this, is that the US had a technology advantage by investing in
Mm.
space technology. So you don't know what the benefits will be when you're investing that, I'll call it that seed money.
Yeah.
You're investing in the technology, but the dividends, GPS alone, look, we are completely dependent on GPS. Think about Uber,
Mm.
Airbnb. I was in Dubai. There's all kinds, Kareem,
Mm.
there's all kinds of apps now that could not exist
Mhm.
without GPS or cybersecurity. And those CEOs probably have no idea, when they're creating their app, wow, I'm so grateful for that free GPS that the US government paid for, right?
Yeah.
Because the US government invested in GPS
Mhm.
initially as a military, then it became military and civilian, and now, it's even more civilian and a small sector is still military.
Mm.
Think about all our airplanes, think about that shipping, think about protecting animals in Africa. They have GPS collars on so they can check for poachers. Think
Yeah.
about the sensors of the drones that are protecting that wildlife from poachers. We don't even think about all that technology. So what I'm sharing with you is, I really want to be an advocate, just like I am on your show. The
Mm.
Space Foundation, through our Center of Innovation, has a workforce development roadmap. It's awareness, access, training, connecting, and mentoring. The first step is everyone has to be aware that
Mm.
there's an opportunity for them. Underrepresented groups, rural communities, inner city, women, African Americans, Hispanics, Africans, South Americans, Canadians, they're part of the good system. How do we make sure that no one on planet Earth is going to get left behind by this technology? So
Mm.
the first step is, I want to be out there making people aware. Then they have to have an access point. How do they come into the space ecosystem? So I shared with you, NASA and ESA have websites. You could become an entrepreneur. You could get a certificate. So what's an access point? Because when you think about the space ecosystem, most people are intimidated, like, oh, that's not for me. They've
Yeah.
already predetermined that that's not for them. So we've got to break down that barrier, provide them an access point.
Mm.
Then they probably need some training, whether it's an internship, a certificate, or a PhD, somewhere in between. Then this is the part you and I can collaborate on. Networking.
Mm.
It's so important to build your network with organizations that you share commonalities. So there are some great ones I shared with you. You said UNUSA, the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, Space for Women. There's WomenTech Network. There's Women in Aerospace. Um, there's Space Generation Advisory Council. There's Tod'Aérs. And these are global groups. So
Yeah.
your listeners could be somewhere, they could Google these, they could find them. They could find a way to start finding other individuals that might share their passion. And then, as we talked at the beginning of the show, find a mentor. When you
Mm.
can find a mentor, many times they can help you overcome those other challenges. So I that's my long long answer to a short question of
Mm,
it's really about I see the future. There are great opportunities, but we need to make sure that everyone on planet Earth benefits from
mm,
space technology.
mm. Beautifully summarized. And I think that's so wonderful for the listeners to actually go, yeah, pretty much everything starts with awareness and then action, and then having opportunities to connect and to grow and to lean in to people who are actually there to support you. They're happy to help you find your path, but definitely find a coach, a mentor, join these groups, free groups. Things are available for you to access. There aren't the barriers. Sometimes we put our own barriers on ourselves. We think it's going to be so difficult. And the reality is no, immerse yourself, lean into your heart, what you desire to do, and actually then it will lead to a place for you. Definitely connect with Shelli, everybody. I'll be putting all of your details on my podcast platform and YouTube channel. It is not hard to find Shelli. She will definitely be able to help you find your place, find your way, point you in the right direction. What I have learned from this amazing conversation today too is, at this stage of a woman who is, at an elite level of her career, it's the passion to be globally really collaborative, to give back, to help people on their way, to make sure that people at all ends of the planet are not being underrepresented or missing out, although we often, and I'm happy to say that from Australia, you think US are doing certain things and owning that. That's actually not true. That's right. What you shared about the investments that we often think, how much money was spent on this one project, but we're not thinking of all of those benefits that we now benefit from, not just, from the US initially, but those benefits are going global, and that we all take them for granted and do rely on them now. And so one, appreciation and finding a way that we can be part of this story, this journey of ensuring our future planet and the planets beyond are in their optimum state, and that we are being smart about how we're progressing in the future. Thank you so much for being on my program today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm so honored to join you. I hope we can circle back in 2022 and I can share some other new stories or new opportunities, or some of those young people I've met and share their stories. So thank you again for inviting me. And I look forward to listening to more of your podcasts because they are excellent. I was sharing with you earlier that I listened to your one on changing, change management in organizations. So your podcasts are very enlightening, and no matter where you are in your career, you can learn something from your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, Shelli. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Memoirs of Successful Women. You can find me at anniegibbins.com, where you can download my free resources, get connected on social, and check out my online magic transformation program. If you love this show, feel free to subscribe to future episodes, and of course, share it with your friends. I'll see you again soon, and until then, happy podcasting.